The Knight Who Never Slept. Picture a stone chamber, lit only by the trembling flame of a candle. Outside, the world is quiet, no traffic, no clocks ticking on walls, only the wind brushing against thick castle stone. Inside, a knight sits upright on the edge of his bed. Not resting, not dreaming, waiting. In medieval Europe, sleep was not always a refuge. For some, it was a threat. Knights, especially those sworn to sacred orders, believed sleep was the moment the soul became vulnerable. When the body lay still, the mind loosened its grip, and in that looseness something else could enter. Stories were told of knights who refused to sleep fully, men who trained themselves to drift but never surrender. Their eyes closed, but their awareness remained just sharp enough to wake at the smallest disturbance. A creak of wood, a change in air, a whisper that did not belong to the wind. This was not insomnia as we understand it today. It was vigilance. To sleep deeply was to risk failing one's duty, not just to king or country, but to God. Medieval theology taught that demons did not need daylight. They worked the night shift. They entered through cracks in discipline, through moments of weakness. And sleep, especially unguarded sleep, was seen as the greatest weakness of all. So the knight learned to treat the bed as a battlefield. He lay down not to rest, but to endure. The posture mattered, the prayers mattered. Some slept sitting upright, believing it kept the soul alert. Others slept in armor, metal pressing into flesh, pain serving as an anchor to consciousness. Comfort was suspicious. Ease was dangerous. Ask yourself gently as you listen. Why would an entire culture distrust rest? Because in their world, sleep looked disturbingly like death. The body still, the eyes closed, the will suspended. Medieval sermons often described sleep as a rehearsal, not for dreams, but for dying. If you could not control yourself in sleep, how could you face judgment when death came without warning? And so the knight stayed awake. Not because he could not sleep, but because he believed he should not. Notice how different this is from modern exhaustion. Today, sleeplessness feels like failure. Back then, it could feel like virtue. Staying awake meant staying pure, staying watchful, staying worthy. As your breath slows, imagine the strain of that vigilance. Night after night, holding the mind half open, never fully letting go, never trusting darkness to be empty. And now, consider this quiet paradox. The knight feared sleep because it removed control. Yet the longer he resisted sleep, the weaker his control became. Fatigue blurred judgment. Hallucinations crept in. Shadows stretched. The very demons he feared were more likely to appear in a mind deprived of rest. By fighting sleep, he invited the thing he feared most. This is the first paradox of medieval knights. Sleep was dangerous, but refusing sleep was dangerous too. And if even trained warriors could not trust, what happened when the body lay still? What happened to ordinary people, alone in the dark, when something pressed down on their chest and they could not move? That question carried them into the next fear of the medieval knight. The bed as a battlefield. For most of human history, the bed was not a place of comfort. It was a site of struggle. The medieval bed was narrow, stiff, often shared, sometimes infested. Straw mattresses shifted and collapsed under the body. Wooden frames creaked with every movement. Curtains were drawn not for luxury, but to keep out drafts and eyes. But the true danger was invisible. When a medieval person lay down at night, they believed they were entering contested territory. The body rested, but the soul was thought to wander, and anything that wandered could be followed. This is why bedtime rituals mattered so deeply. Prayers were spoken not casually, but defensively. Specific words, memorized and repeated, formed a kind of invisible armor. Some prayers were meant to seal the body. Others were meant to anchor the soul so it would not drift too far from the flesh. People slept with religious objects pressed against their chests, medals, small crosses, scripture sewn into cloth and placed beneath pillows. These were not symbols, they were tools. The bed itself became a barrier. Beds were positioned carefully, never directly facing doors or windows. Sleeping with one's feet toward the door was avoided. It mirrored how corpses were carried from a home. To sleep that way invited death to mistake you for the already claimed. Even posture mattered. Sleeping flat on the back was discouraged. It resembled death too closely. Side sleeping was safer. Curling slightly kept the body alive in form. Upright sleeping, common among monks and soldiers, kept awareness closer to waking. Every detail was part of a strategy. Because in the medieval mind, the night was not empty time. It was active. Demons did not announce themselves with fire and noise. They were subtle. They tested boundaries. They slipped into dreams, whispered through half-sleep, pressed thoughts where resistance was weakest. And the bed was where resistance dropped. Think about how you feel as sleep approaches, the way thoughts loosen, how images blur, how the sense of self softens. Medieval people noticed this too, but instead of seeing it as relief, they saw it as exposure. To lie down was to lower your guard. And so the bed became a battlefield where the fight was not physical, but internal. A fight to remain morally intact while consciousness faded. Now pause here for a moment. Notice how familiar this fear still is. Even today, people struggle to fall asleep because the mind refuses to let go. Thoughts replay, worries sharpen, control feels safer than surrender. The medieval person feared demons. We fear our own thoughts. Different language, same tension. The paradox is quiet but powerful. Sleep requires surrender, but surrender feels unsafe. And so humans across centuries have turned the place of rest into a place of vigilance. But if the bed itself was dangerous, who, exactly, was believed to be watching from the shadows while people slept? The answer comes next. With creatures believed to work the night shift. Demons on the night shift. When the sun disappeared in the medieval world, responsibility shifted. Daylight belonged to humans. Night belonged to something else. People believed that darkness was not merely the absence of light, but the presence of other wills, intelligences that waited patiently for vision to fail and vigilance to soften. The night was thought to be structured, almost bureaucratic, with specific dangers assigned to specific hours. Demons, it was believed, worked in shifts. Midnight was especially feared, not because it was dramatic, but because it was quiet. Church bells marked it carefully. Monks rose from sleep to pray, not only to honor God, but to interrupt whatever else might be moving. This was the hour when temptations were strongest, when doubts surfaced uninvited, when forbidden desires slipped into dreams wearing familiar faces. Medieval texts describe demons as opportunistic rather than monstrous, beings that nudged, suggested, distorted. They didn't force. They waited. A wandering thought, a sudden fear, a dream that felt too vivid, these were considered openings. There were demons believed to specialize in fatigue, others in lust, others in despair. Some worked through dreams, others through waking half-consciousness when the body was still but the mind floated between worlds. Sleep itself was not sinful, but it was risky. This is why medieval theology paid such close attention to how one fell asleep. Going to bed angry was dangerous. So was indulging in excessive imagination before rest. Thoughts, they believed, carried momentum into dreams, and demons could ride that momentum. Notice how carefully this mirrors modern psychology. Today we talk about intrusive thoughts, anxiety spirals, and subconscious processing. Medieval thinkers used different language, but they observed the same patterns. The mind becomes porous at night. And so they filled the night with structure. Candles were left burning not just for light, but as symbols of vigilance. Bells rang at prescribed hours to remind unseen forces that the world was still being watched. Even animals were believed to sense nocturnal danger. Barking dogs and restless horses were taken seriously. Sleep was a negotiated ceasefire, not a guaranteed refuge. And yet, alongside fear, there was reassurance. Because if demons had night shifts, so did protectors. The night was dangerous precisely because it mattered, because something important was happening in the dark, something that shaped the soul. Which brings us to the other side of the bedside. The unseen watchers were believed to stand guard while humans slept. Not enemies, but guardians. Guardian angels at the bedside. If demons moved through the night with quiet intention, medieval belief insisted they were never alone. Where danger gathered, protection followed. Every sleeping body, it was said, attracted attention, not because humans were powerful but because they were vulnerable. And vulnerability in medieval thought demanded guardianship. Guardian angels were not imagined as distant, glowing figures hovering abstractly in the heavens. They were intimate presences, assigned, attentive, close enough to the bed to hear breathing change. While awake, a person could choose. While asleep, they surrendered. That surrender, theologians believed, required supervision. Angels were thought to stand watch during sleep, not to prevent dreams but to regulate them, to soften harmful visions, to block spiritual intrusion, to intervene when fear tipped toward despair. Many bedtime prayers were not requests for rest, but for oversight. Stand between me and what I cannot see. Guard my thoughts while I am unable to. Sleep was treated as a temporary abandonment of agency. The soul loosened its grip. The body remained, but awareness drifted. In that drifting state, angels were believed to keep the soul anchored not by force, but by presence. There are medieval accounts of people waking suddenly, convinced someone had called their name. This was not dismissed as imagination. It was often interpreted as intervention, an angel interrupting a dangerous dream or preventing the soul from wandering too far. Notice the subtlety of this belief. Angels were not there to eliminate fear. Fear still existed. Nightmares still came. But the belief was that fear had limits, that there was a boundary beyond which terror could not pass. This is why beds were blessed, why children slept with symbols nearby, why adults traced signs in the air before closing their eyes. These rituals were not superstition alone, they were psychological anchors, signals to the mind that it was not alone in the dark. Even death was thought to rehearse itself during sleep. Each night the soul loosened its hold on the body, just slightly, and returned by morning. Angels were said to oversee this return, ensuring the soul did not drift permanently away. Sleep was not passive. It was a controlled descent. And angels were not distant saviors. They were night staff, quiet, patient, watching not the world but you. Which leads us to the most unsettling belief of all. If sleep resembled death, what did that make waking? Sleep as a rehearsal for death. In medieval thought, sleep was never just rest. It was practice. Each night the body lay still, breath slowed, awareness dimmed. The world faded without warning, and for a few hours consciousness withdrew, not fully gone but no longer anchored where it had been. This resemblance was impossible to ignore. Writers, monks, and physicians described sleep as death's younger sibling, a smaller departure, a reversible one. Where death took the soul away entirely, sleep merely loosened its ties. To close your eyes was to surrender control, to trust that you would return. That trust was not casual. People prepared for sleep the way one might prepare for judgment. They confessed minor sins, repaired small moral debts, settled arguments before nightfall, not because they expected to die, but because they accepted that they might not wake. This awareness shaped how night was approached. The final thoughts before sleep mattered. A corrupted mind, they believed, could wander dangerously far. A soul burdened by guilt might not find its way back. Sleep was the only daily moment where death came close enough to touch without finishing its work. Dreams, then, were not entertainment. They were trial runs. In dreams, the self was stripped of defenses. Logic bent. Time collapsed. Identity loosened. The dreamer experienced fear, longing, punishment, revelation, all without the stability of waking reason. Exactly as the soul would, they thought, after death. This is why certain dreams were feared more than others. Not nightmares of monsters, but dreams of judgment, of doors closing, of wandering without destination. These were interpreted as rehearsals for the afterlife, previews of the soul's condition. Some monks even sought this resemblance intentionally. They slept on hard surfaces, limited their rest, interrupted their own sleep to maintain awareness during the descent into unconsciousness. The goal was not suffering, it was familiarity, to learn how the soul behaved when the body went quiet. The closer one could approach sleep without fully entering it, the closer one came to understanding death without crossing into it. But here is the paradox. If sleep is a rehearsal for death, and death is final, why do we practice something we cannot perfect? Because medieval thinkers believed the point was not mastery. It was humility. Each night reminded the living that control was temporary. That certainty dissolved when consciousness faded. That existence itself depended on returning from a place we could not observe. Sleep taught what daylight concealed. That life continues not because we command it, but because it allows us back in. And if sleep was already a threshold, what else crossed it while we lay still? The demon on your chest. There are moments in the night when the body wakes, but the self does not. Your eyes open, the room is familiar, the darkness rests where it should. And yet something is wrong. You cannot move. Your breath feels shallow, pressed, borrowed. A weight settles across your chest, not heavy enough to crush you, but firm enough to convince you that resistance is useless. You try to speak. Nothing emerges. You try to scream. The air refuses to cooperate. And then, almost inevitably, you sense a presence. Medieval people knew this moment well. They did not call it paralysis. They called it a visitation. Across Europe, the experience was described with startling consistency. A figure perched upon the sleeper's body, a hag, a demon, a shadow with weight. In Latin texts, it was the incubus from incubare, to lie upon. In Old English, it became mare, the root of the word nightmare. The descriptions were never vague. The creature sat pressed, watched. Sometimes it whispered, sometimes it mocked, sometimes it merely waited, breathing where breath should not be. This was not imagined as metaphor. It was a physical event with a supernatural explanation. The demon did not arrive because the body failed. The body failed because the demon had arrived. And crucially, it targeted the threshold. Sleep was already a liminal state, half alive, half absent, exactly the kind of opening such beings required. Medical texts of the time warned against sleeping flat on the back. It invited attack, the chest exposed, the breath vulnerable, the soul unguarded. Prayer before sleep was not just piety. It was armor. Amulets were placed beneath pillows, psalms recited like passwords, saints invoked as night guards, because once the body surrendered movement, only belief remained active. What makes this paradox endure is how precise the experience still is. Modern neuroscience calls it sleep paralysis, a mismatch between waking consciousness and a dreaming body. The brain has already shut down voluntary movement to protect the sleeper from acting out dreams. Awareness returns too early. The mechanism is understood, but the feeling is unchanged. The weight, The presence, the certainty that something else is there. No explanation, ancient or modern, fully dissolves that sensation. Because the paradox is not about demons. It is about vulnerability. Sleep removes the illusion of autonomy. The mind awakens to discover it is not in control, not of the body, not of safety, not of the night. The medieval demon gave that fear a shape. Today, we give it a diagnosis. But when it happens, when the chest tightens and the room watches back, the logic arrives later. First comes the ancient certainty. You are not alone. And the night is not empty. Possession or sleep paralysis. When the body betrayed you in the night, medieval people did not ask how. They asked who. Because if something could steal your movement, if it could sit on your chest, silence your voice, hijack your breath, then surely it was not an accident of flesh. It was an intrusion. To the medieval mind, the boundary between body and soul was thin, especially during sleep. Waking hours belonged to reason, prayer, labor, but night belonged to forces that did not follow daylight rules. So when a person awoke unable to move, unable to speak, watching shadows gather intelligence in the corners of the room, the conclusion was simple. Something had entered. Church records describe sleepers who felt their limbs bound without rope. Others reported being held by unseen hands. Some claimed their mouths were forced open, their breath guided, their thoughts interrupted by words that did not feel like their own. This was not always called possession. That term was reserved for prolonged states. What happened at night was subtler. A touch, a visit, a temporary occupation. The paradox emerges in how carefully these experiences were categorized. Medieval scholars did not lump all-night terrors together. They debated distinctions. Was the victim sinful, inviting demons through moral weakness, or innocent, attacked precisely because they were pure? Was the paralysis a warning or a test? Some theologians argued that demons could not truly control the soul, only the body. Others believed the soul wandered during sleep, leaving the body exposed like an unlocked house. Either way, sleep was dangerous not because it was passive, but because it was undefended. The most unsettling accounts come from people who were fully conscious during the event. They could describe the room accurately. They could recall the pressure, the timing, the exact moment control returned. That detail mattered. It meant this was not a dream. It was an experience. Modern science reframes this moment as REM intrusion, dreaming physiology spilling into wakefulness. The brain immobilizes the body to prevent dream enactment. Consciousness flickers on before the lock releases. No demon required. But here is where the paradox deepens. The brain doesn't just immobilize the body, it activates threat detection systems. The amygdala fires, fear intensifies. The mind expects danger, and so it creates it. A presence forms. Not random, not abstract. It takes the shape the culture already knows. In medieval Europe, it was demons and spirits. In other cultures, it was witches, ancestors, shadow figures, alien visitors. Different names, same experience, which raises the unsettling question medieval thinkers never stopped asking. If the experience is universal, is the explanation the only thing that changes? Sleep paralysis explains how the body freezes, but it does not fully explain why the mind insists on company, why fear takes form, why the night always brings a watcher. Perhaps medieval people were wrong about demons, but right about vulnerability. Sleep strips us to the minimum: breath, awareness, waiting. In that state, the mind reaches for meaning. And whether we call it possession or paralysis, the fear arrives the same way: ancient, immediate, undeniable. Because in the dark, with the body locked and the room awake, It never feels like nothing. Yet, the night visitations nobody confessed. There were stories medieval people told aloud. And then there were stories whispered only in confessionals, if they were told at all, because some night encounters carried shame, not fear, guilt. Monks recorded accounts of sleepers who insisted they had been visited in the night, not attacked, not frightened. Visited. Figures appeared at the edge of the bed, sometimes human, sometimes beautiful, sometimes familiar. They spoke softly or not at all. They touched, they stayed. And when morning came, the sleeper was left with certainty and confusion. Had they sinned or been deceived? The medieval world believed demons were cunning, not monstrous. They did not always arrive with claws and smoke. Sometimes they came as comfort, as intimacy, as attention given when no one else was watching. These encounters were called nocturnal visitations, and they were deeply paradoxical, because the victim often did not resist. Some accounts describe paralysis. Others describe movement, sitting up, responding, even speaking. The body seemed awake, the will felt divided. That contradiction disturbed theologians. If the body moved, was the person responsible? If desire appeared, was it chosen? If memory lingered, was it confession, worthy? The church struggled with where to place blame when sleep blurred intention. One theory claimed demons exploited half-sleep, that liminal state where awareness flickers but judgment sleeps. Another argued the soul might dream while the body acted, like a puppet whose strings were briefly borrowed. But the most uncomfortable explanation was this. What if the mind created the visitor itself? Medieval scholars didn't frame it as psychology, but they understood imagination as a force, something capable of manifesting sensations so vivid they overpowered reason. Night imagination was considered especially dangerous because it operated without daylight restraint. Yet here is the strange thing. People across different regions describe the same patterns. A presence that arrived quietly, a sense of being chosen, a mixture of comfort and unease, a memory that refused to fade like a dream. Today, we recognize these experiences as hypnagogic hallucinations, vivid sensory events occurring during the transition into or out of sleep. They can include touch, sound, and full-bodied realism. But numbing it does not erase its power, because the medieval question still lingers beneath the science. If an experience feels real and changes you, does it matter where it came from? Many who reported night visitations carried the memory for life. Some altered their prayers. Some withdrew from sleep altogether. Others doubled down on ritual, candles, crosses, charms near the bed, not to stop dreams but to stop encounters. The paradox is not whether demons visited the medieval bedroom. It's that sleep, meant to restore the soul, became a place where desire, fear, faith, and guilt tangled into something no one wanted to name too clearly. Because to name it was to take responsibility. And some things, once experienced in the dark, felt safer left unnamed. 9. When ghosts testify in your dreams. In the medieval world, dreams were not private. They were evidence. A dream could condemn you. A dream could absolve you. And sometimes, a dream could testify against the dead. People believed the boundary between sleep and the afterlife was thin, thinner at night, thinner still in fear. When the body rested, the soul was thought to wander, and in that wandering it could meet those who no longer belonged to the living. Ghosts did not always appear in graveyards. Often they appeared beside the bed. Medieval records describe dreams in which the dead returned not as shadows but as witnesses. They spoke clearly. They accused. They demanded justice. Some begged for prayers. Others arrived furious, recounting betrayals that had never been confessed aloud. And the unsettling part. These dreams were taken seriously. If someone dreamed that a murdered man named his killer, the dream might be reported to authorities. If a deceased relative appeared asking for restitution, land disputes could reopen. If a spirit claimed improper burial rites, masses were scheduled, sometimes for years. The dreamer was not dismissed. They were summoned. To the medieval mind, the sleeping brain was not inventing. It was receiving. Dreams were considered one of the few channels through which God, angels, or restless souls could communicate without the interference of waking ego. But this created a terrifying paradox. What if the dream was false? What if the mind fabricated a ghost, and the world acted on it? Clerics debated this intensely. Some argued that God would not allow lies to pass through dreams without signs. Others warned that demons could impersonate the dead, manipulating grief and guilt to spread chaos. Yet even skeptics admitted something troubling. Many dream testimonies included details the dreamer should not have known. Hidden debts, secret crimes, unspoken resentments, coincidence, inference, or something stranger. Modern psychology would point to memory, suggestion, and subconscious reconstruction, the mind stitching together fragments into narrative, but medieval scholars lacked that language. What they saw instead was a courtroom held inside the mind, where the dead took the stand and sleep served as judge. Some monasteries even recorded dreams as legal documents, not proof but signals, a reason to investigate, a reason to pray, a reason to reopen what the living wanted closed. And for the dreamer, the burden was heavy. Because once a ghost spoke through you, silence felt like complicity. Imagine waking with certainty, not suspicion, not fear, but certainty that you had been told something you were not meant to ignore. That is the paradox. Sleep, meant to offer escape from responsibility, became a place where responsibility arrived uninvited. The night did not let the past rest. And neither, after such dreams, could the dreamer. 10. The Dream Courtroom. In the medieval imagination, dreams did not fade with morning light. They lingered. They demanded interpretation. And sometimes they demanded judgment. If ghosts could testify in dreams, then dreams themselves became trials. Not metaphorical trials, real ones. People were asked to recount their dreams in confession. Monks recorded them in margins. Chroniclers preserved them alongside famines and wars. A troubling dream was not dismissed as nonsense. It was treated like a message that needed decoding before it caused harm. This created what we might call the dream courtroom. In this strange court, the dreamer was both witness and defendant. The soul stood accused by images it did not consciously choose. A violent dream could suggest hidden sin. A sexual dream could imply moral weakness. A dream of flight might signal pride. A dream of falling, divine warning. But here is the paradox. If dreams came from God, how could they condemn you for content you did not will? And if they came from demons, why was you held responsible for receiving them? Medieval theologians struggled with this contradiction. Augustine argued that dreams revealed inclinations already present in the soul, not actions, but tendencies. Others believed dreams were moral tests, moments where the soul's true alignment surfaced when the guard of waking reason fell away. Yet in practice, the line blurred. A knight who dreamed of murder might be urged to confess violent thoughts. A monk plagued by erotic dreams could be punished, despite having done nothing while awake. The dream was treated not as fiction, but as leakage, the unconscious spilling truth. Some dreams even entered formal legal spaces. There are records of individuals swearing oaths based on dreams they had experienced. Others justified breaking contracts because a dream had warned them of disaster. In rare cases, visions received during sleep were cited to support claims of divine permission or condemnation. And still doubt remained, because dreams contradicted each other. One person dreamed a saint approved an action. Another dreamed the same saint condemned it, whose dream carried authority. This forced medieval thinkers into an uncomfortable realization. Dreams could not be fully trusted, yet they could not be ignored. So the court remained open, but no verdict was final. The Dream Courtroom became a place of endless deliberation, where meaning shifted with context, reputation, and interpretation. Authority mattered, so did holiness, so did fear. In the end, dreams revealed less about the divine, and more about the mind struggling to live under constant moral surveillance. Sleep was supposed to be rest. Instead, it became interrogation. And the verdict was never certain. The lost first sleep superpower. In the medieval world, sleep did not arrive as a single, unbroken descent into darkness. It came in two acts. The first sleep began shortly after sunset. Families gathered indoors as darkness settled, candles burned low, and the body surrendered naturally to rest. This sleep was deep, heavy, and dream-rich. Medieval texts describe it as the most restorative part of the night, the moment when the body truly repaired itself. Then something strange happened. People woke up. Not in panic. Not from nightmares. Not because of noise. They woke calmly, often for an hour or more. This was called the watch, or the middle sleep, and it was considered completely normal. During this waking interval, people prayed, they reflected, they talked quietly, some visited neighbors, some wrote letters, some had sex, some simply sat with their thoughts watching the fire fade. Then came the second sleep, lighter, shorter, and closer to dawn. For centuries, this rhythm shaped human life. And then it vanished. The paradox is not that medieval people slept differently. The paradox is that we forgot. Historical records mention first and second sleep casually, without explanation, because no explanation was needed. Medical manuals recommended activities specifically for the waking hour between sleeps. Religious texts advised prayers that were meant to be said after the first sleep. Court records mention crimes committed between the two sleeps, as if the phrase required no clarification at all. This pattern wasn't cultural coincidence. It was biological. When researchers removed artificial light in modern sleep experiments, participants naturally drifted into the same two-sleep rhythm within weeks. Their bodies remembered something their minds had forgotten. So why did we lose it? Artificial lighting stretched evenings. Industrial schedules demanded early starts. Sleep became compressed into a single block, forced, monitored, optimized. The quiet hour in the middle of the night disappeared. And with it, something subtle changed. That waking window had been a space without pressure. No productivity, no obligation, just thought, prayer, intimacy, and reflection. A liminal state, not fully awake, not fully asleep. Modern insomnia often strikes at the same hour medieval people once accepted as normal. We wake at 2 or 3 a.m. We panic. We assume something is wrong. But for most of human history, nothing was wrong at all. The body was simply following an older rhythm. The lost paradox is this. We medicalized a pattern that once defined rest. Sleep didn't become broken. It flattened. And perhaps the most unsettling question isn't why medieval people slept this way, but why our minds still try to return there, night after night, even when we no longer allow it. The peasant's midnight intermission. When medieval peasants woke in the middle of the night, they didn't call it insomnia. They called it life continuing. After the first sleep loosened the body from the day, the household would often stir again quietly, deliberately, as if the night itself had opened a hidden doorway. Fires were rekindled, tools were checked, bread dough was turned, animals were calmed, a sick child was tended to, a prayer was whispered. This wasn't rebellion against sleep. It was a cooperation with it. Unlike modern life, medieval labor followed the body, not the clock. Workdays began at dawn and ended at dusk, dictated by light, seasons, and weather. That meant the night didn't need to carry the full burden of rest in one uninterrupted stretch. The midnight waking became a buffer, a pause between efforts. Some historians describe it as the peasant's quiet power hour, a time when the village was still, the world softened, and decisions could be made without urgency. Disputes were settled, plans were formed, stories were told in low voices. The mind, freed from exhaustion but not yet alert, entered a reflective state we rarely experience today. Court records reveal something curious. Confessions were often given during this hour. Prayers were believed to be more sincere. Dreams from the first sleep were discussed and interpreted before the second. This wasn't accidental. The medieval mind believed truth rose more easily when the body was rested, but the world remained quiet. The space between sleeps was seen as a threshold, close enough to dreams to receive insight, awake enough to act on it. Contrast this with now. When we wake in the night, we fight it. We reach for phones. We check time. We judge ourselves for failing to sleep properly. The moment becomes anxious instead of useful. But to the peasant, this waking wasn't a failure. It was permission. Permission to exist without production. Permission to think without rushing. Permission to let the night do some of the work the day could not. The paradox is subtle but sharp. Modern life worships efficiency, yet erased the most psychologically spacious hour humans once had. We gained longer workdays. We lost the intermission. And maybe that's why modern nights feel so crowded with thoughts. We compressed reflection into exhaustion, expecting sleep to do everything at once. The medieval peasant knew something we forgot. Rest is not always continuous. Sometimes it comes in chapters. Holy insomnia, the monk's midnight alarm. In monasteries across medieval Europe, the night was never fully allowed to belong to sleep. Just as the deepest rest began to settle into the body, a bell would sound low, deliberate, unmistakable. Monks rose from their narrow beds not in panic, not in irritation, but in obedience. This waking had a name, matins, sometimes called vigils, sometimes simply the night office. To modern ears, this sounds like deprivation, cruel discipline, a system designed to exhaust the body in the name of devotion. But that assumption misses something essential. The monks were not fighting sleep. They were using it. Their schedule was built around the same two-part rhythm peasants experienced naturally, first sleep, waking, second sleep, but refined into ritual. After several hours of rest, the body was calm, the mind softened, the noise of the day long gone. This was considered the most spiritually receptive state a human could enter while still awake. Not groggy, not alert, porous. Monastic texts describe this hour as dangerous and sacred at once. Dangerous because the mind, loosened by dreams, was vulnerable to distraction. Sacred because that same looseness allowed closeness to God. They believed something radical. That truth arrived more easily when the ego was tired. Prayer at noon was respectable. Prayer at dawn was disciplined. But prayer in the dead center of the night, when the self thinned, was believed to be heard. Candles flickered in stone chapels as monks chanted psalm they had memorized so deeply the words seemed to rise without effort. Some accounts describe moments where chanting continued even as individual monks drifted in and out of half-dreams, voices weaving together into something almost unconscious. This wasn't a flaw. It was the point. Medieval theology held that the rational mind was not the highest form of understanding. Intellect could analyze scripture, but humility, vulnerability, and surrender allowed communion. and nothing humbled the body like being woken in darkness. The paradox here is striking. Modern productivity culture treats broken sleep as damage. Medieval spirituality treated it as access. The monks weren't optimizing efficiency. They were creating openness. They believed that waking once each night reminded the soul it was not sovereign. That comfort was not the goal. That meaning required interruption. And yet, records show many monks returned to sleep after matins, entering a second rest often described as deeper, calmer, and filled with vivid dreams. Their nights were not shorter than hours, just structured differently. We assume uninterrupted sleep is natural. History suggests it was once optional. Perhaps what we now call insomnia would once have been called invitation. Invitation to pause, to listen, to sit quietly in the hour when the world loosens its grip. The peasant's power nap. While monks answered bells in the dark, the rest of medieval society followed a quieter rhythm, one shaped not by doctrine, but by daylight, labor, and the limits of the human body. For peasants, sleep was not a single event. It was a tool. Medieval farming life demanded brutal efficiency. Fields were worked from first light. Meals were heavy, physical, slow to digest. By midday, bodies were warm, muscles spent, blood pulled inward. And so, without ceremony, people rested. Not collapsed. Not unconscious. Paused. This pause had many names across Europe, but the behavior was universal. A short sleep after the main meal, sometimes lying down, sometimes sitting against a wall, a tree, a barn door, sometimes eyes closed, sometimes simply drifting. It wasn't laziness. It was alignment. Medical texts of the Middle Ages, heavily influenced by Galen and humoral theory, warned against fighting this urge. Digestion, they believed, required stillness. If a laborer pushed through the afternoon without rest, illness followed, fevers, melancholy, weakness of spirit. Sleep in this worldview was not passive. It was maintenance. And unlike modern naps squeezed between meetings or guilt-ridden alarms, medieval rest had no stigma, no productivity anxiety, no justification required. The body signaled. The body was obeyed. What's strange is how precise this instinct was. Records show that these rests were short, often no more than 20 to 40 minutes, long enough to reset, not long enough to sink, long enough to restore clarity without dulling alertness. The same window modern neuroscience now calls optimal. But peasants didn't need research. They had repetition. Day after day, year after year, their nervous systems learned the rhythm of exertion and release. Sleep came not from exhaustion, but from timing. This created a paradox we've mostly forgotten. Medieval peasants often slept less at night than we do, yet complained less of fatigue. Because rest was distributed, not hoarded. Night sleep. Midnight waking. Midday pause. The body never fell too far behind itself. Today, we compress rest into a single fragile block and wonder why it breaks so easily. The peasant's power nap wasn't a luxury. It was a survival adaptation. A reminder that sleep is not something to conquer once a day, but something the body negotiates with time, light, and effort. And perhaps that's the strangest part. In trying to modernize sleep, we may have made it less human. The saint who slept through suffering. In medieval stories, wakefulness was often praised as devotion. Saints kept vigil. Monks rose in darkness. Holy people were expected to endure discomfort as proof of faith. And yet, threaded quietly through these accounts, there is a strange contradiction: figures revered for their sanctity who slept deeply, even through pain, illness, or persecution. Their rest was not seen as weakness, but as something altogether different. There are records of saints who, while imprisoned or wounded, fell into long, unbroken sleep. While others prayed beside them or feared for their lives, these figures rested with an almost unsettling calm. Observers described it as unnatural. How could someone sleep while suffering pressed so close? How could the body surrender when the world demanded endurance? The paradox emerges here. Sleep, usually framed as vulnerability, became evidence of divine protection. To sleep through hardship was interpreted not as avoidance, but as transcendence. The saint was thought to be so aligned with a higher order that the body no longer reacted as expected. Pain lost its authority. Fear loosened its grip. Rest became a kind of miracle. In hagiographies, this sleep is often described with reverence. The saint's breathing slows, their face softens. Even as wounds remain, the body enters a state of peace that witnesses cannot explain. Some accounts claim angels stood guard. Others suggest the soul simply trusted completely, enough to let go. This challenges the modern assumption that alertness equals strength. Medieval belief allowed for another possibility, that true power might look like surrender, that the deepest faith expresses itself not in resistance, but in rest so complete it defies circumstance. There is also a psychological truth hiding beneath the theology. When the mind no longer fights what it cannot change, the nervous system may settle in unexpected ways. The body, released from constant vigilance, finds refuge in sleep. What medieval writers called holiness, we might now recognize as profound acceptance. But they did not analyze it, they watched, and they wondered. Tonight, you are not asked to believe in miracles, only to notice the pattern, that rest can arrive even when conditions are imperfect. That sleep does not require safety to begin. Sometimes it creates safety by its very presence. As you lie here, carrying the small aches and quiet worries of your own day, consider this gentler model of strength. You do not need to stay alert to prove anything. You do not need to endure wakefulness as a virtue. Sometimes, the most radical act is to let the body do what it knows how to do, even when the world insists otherwise. And as that permission settles, the night opens further, toward the next darker mystery. The village that never woke up. Medieval Europe recorded time differently than we do. Days were not measured by minutes, but by bells. Nights were not empty gaps between days, but sacred stretches filled with meaning, danger, and mystery. And within those nights, there are stories that still unsettle historians, accounts of entire villages that went to sleep and did not wake as expected. Chroniclers describe mornings where bells rang and no one came. Fires burned low in hearths, bread remained untouched, animals wandered freely through open doors. In some stories, days passed before outsiders realized something was wrong. In others, travelers arrived to find whole communities lying still, as if time itself had paused. The explanations varied wildly. Some blamed curses, divine punishment, or demonic visitation. Others spoke of poisoned air, a miasma drifting silently through the night. There were whispers of witchcraft, of spells cast while the village slept, of sins that invited collective judgment. Sleep in these accounts becomes not restoration but surrender. Yet behind the mythic language, a more unsettling paradox appears. Medieval people understood sleep as a threshold state, a place where the soul loosened its grip on the body. To fall asleep together, deeply and without interruption, was to trust the night completely. And that trust, they believed, could be dangerous. Modern scholars suspect outbreaks of illness, carbon monoxide from enclosed fires, or ergot poisoning in grain. But these explanations feel thin against the emotional weight of the stories. What mattered then was not the cause, but the meaning. A village that never woke up became a warning. Sleep is powerful, but power without vigilance invites loss. And yet there is something eerily peaceful in these accounts. No struggle is described, no cries, no chaos, just a quiet transition from evening to stillness. The night did not rage, it simply closed. This creates a deeply medieval contradiction. Sleep was necessary, sacred, and ordained by God. Yet it was also the moment when the body was most exposed, when fate could intervene without resistance. As you drift toward your own rest, this story does not ask you to fear sleep. It asks you to respect it, to recognize that when consciousness fades, control fades with it. That rest is not neutral, it is an act of trust. And perhaps that is why sleep held such weight in the medieval mind. Because to sleep was to place yourself, completely, in the hands of forces you could not see. The night keeps its secrets, and it always has. The beautiful sleeper who never ages. Across medieval Europe there are quiet, persistent stories of sleepers who did not decay with time. Young women laid to rest or sealed away who remained untouched by age. Skin unwrinkled, hair unwhitened, bodies preserved not by ice or stone but by sleep itself. These were not always fairy tales. Monastic records describe incorrupt bodies discovered decades later, lying as if only moments had passed. Villagers whispered of cursed maidens, holy innocents, or souls suspended between life and death. To medieval eyes, time had simply stopped for them. Sleep here becomes more than rest, it becomes preservation. The paradox is unsettling. Aging was understood as a visible marker of sin, struggle, and earthly decay. To escape it was unnatural unless sanctioned by divine will. Some sleepers were declared saints, their unchanging bodies proof of holiness. Others were feared, sealed away again, their stillness seen as evidence of something unfinished. Why did these stories persist so strongly? Because they touched a deep medieval anxiety, time itself. Life was short. Bodies broke quickly. Disease, childbirth, and war erased futures without warning. Sleep, usually fleeting and fragile, offered a fantasy of pause, of stepping outside the relentless erosion of years. But the cost of this pause was agency. These sleepers did not choose preservation. They did not live while time passed. They were admired, envied, and feared, but never free. Modern science explains some of these cases through natural mummification. Cold environments, sealed tombs. Yet explanation does not erase the meaning these stories carried. To medieval minds, unchanged flesh challenged the divine order. If time could be suspended, then perhaps death itself was negotiable. And that idea was dangerous. So the beautiful sleeper became a warning as much as a wonder. Eternal youth without consciousness was not a blessing. It was a limbo, a reminder that life is not defined by how long the body lasts, but by how fully the mind moves through time. As you rest now, notice how sleep carries you forward rather than freezing you in place. You do not disappear from time, you travel through it gently. The medieval world feared timeless sleep because it erased becoming. And becoming, they believed, was the soul's true purpose. When the night itself was sacred. In the medieval world, night was not merely the absence of day. It was a presence. As the sun lowered and shadows stretched across stone streets and fields, a quiet transformation was believed to occur. The daytime world, governed by labor, hierarchy, and visible order, withdrew, and another realm emerged, one ruled not by sight but by attention. Darkness was thought to thin the veil between worlds. Church bells marked this shift. Curfews rang out not only to enforce order but to signal something deeper. The night belonged to forces beyond human control. Once candles were lit and doors were barred, the world was no longer entirely safe or entirely profane. For medieval people, night carried sacred weight. Many believed God listened more closely after sunset. Prayers whispered in darkness were thought to travel further. Dreams arrived more vividly. Visions came uninvited. Saints received revelations not at noon, but in the long, quiet hours when the body surrendered its defenses. But this sacredness was uneasy. The same darkness that invited angels also welcomed demons. Night did not choose sides. It amplified whatever already lived within the soul. Faith deepened. Fear sharpened. Guilt grew louder. The mind, freed from distraction, turned inward and sometimes found things it did not wish to see. This created a paradox, the medieval world never fully resolved. If night was holy, why was it dangerous? If darkness allowed divine contact, why did it also invite terror? To sleep was to trust, not just the body but the unseen order of the universe. Closing one's eyes meant accepting vulnerability. You could be visited by God or tested by something else. This is why sleep rituals mattered so deeply. Candles were blessed, beds were crossed, psalms were spoken aloud before rest. These were not habits, they were protections. The act of falling asleep was framed as a spiritual risk, a nightly crossing into uncertain territory. Even insomnia was given meaning. To remain awake when the night was sacred suggested resistance or calling. Some believed those who could not sleep were being summoned. Others feared they were being watched. Stillness without rest felt like standing too long at a threshold, unsure whether to step forward or retreat. Modern life treats night as empty time, a pause, a gap between productive hours, but medieval people experienced it as charged space, alive with possibility, danger, and transformation. Perhaps they understood something we've forgotten. When external noise fades, the mind speaks more clearly. When light disappears, imagination awakens. The night doesn't create meaning, it reveals it. As you lie here now, notice how the world has quieted around you. The same stillness medieval sleepers felt, the same surrender to darkness they practiced each night. The night is no longer feared as it once was, but it still holds power. Not because of what arrives in the dark, but because of what rises when everything else falls away. Candles, curfews, and the cost of staying awake. Before electricity softened the edges of night, light was costly. A single candle required labor, materials, time. Wax or tallow had value. To burn light was to consume resources, and so staying awake after dark was never neutral. It was a choice with consequence. This is why medieval towns enforced curfews. When bells rang at dusk, they were not simply announcing bedtime. They were marking the boundary between sanctioned life and unnecessary risk. Streets emptied. Fires were banked. Doors closed not only for safety but for moral order. To remain awake was to step outside the rhythm of the world. Those who ignored curfew were viewed with suspicion. Night watchmen, tavern keepers, scribes, monks, people whose lives required wakefulness, were seen as liminal figures. Useful, yes, necessary, but also unsettling. They occupied hours meant for surrender. Sleep was obedience. It aligned the body with cosmic order. The sun rested, so humans rested. To resist that cycle was, in subtle ways, to resist creation itself. And yet some were compelled to stay awake. Monks rose for midnight prayers. Scholars studied by candlelight. Mothers watched over fevered children. Guards paced walls while others slept. These people bore the cost of wakefulness on behalf of the community. But even sacred wakefulness came with warnings. Medieval texts often cautioned that too much night watching thinned the mind. Staying awake invited wandering thoughts, intrusive visions, spiritual confusion. The longer one remained conscious in darkness, the more porous the boundary between reason and imagination became. Exhaustion was not just physical, it was moral. This is why sleep deprivation was sometimes used as penance, not to punish the body but to humble the soul. A sleepless mind, medieval thinkers believed, could not maintain clarity for long. Pride dissolved, certainty weakened. One became more open to grace or to temptation. The paradox is striking. Sleep was framed as surrender, yet denying sleep was framed as sacrifice. Rest was both obedience and indulgence. Wakefulness was both service and danger. Even now, this tension persists. We praise productivity that ignores rest. We admire those who push through the night. But we also feel, deep down, the cost of that defiance, the quiet unraveling, the way clarity slips when sleep is postponed too long. The medieval world did not romanticize exhaustion. It recognized that staying awake after dark meant paying a price in wax, in health, in certainty. Light burned, time burned, and something inside the watcher slowly dimmed. As you rest now, notice how little effort sleep requires. No candle to light, no bell to obey, no guard to keep. Just permission. The world does not need you awake tonight. And in accepting that, you step back into a rhythm older than fear, older than rules, the rhythm that carries the mind gently toward silence.